This week, we'll find out. What we already have found out is that sometimes our organizational skills get the better of us, but we are here nonetheless. Something. This is the MS Refresh Show. Hello there. My name is Sean Bugler, and this is episode, 53?
53.
February 28th, 2022. It never gets easier to say 2022, or at least it hasn't. We're 2 months into it, and it still feels like the future. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Sean?
I'm really excited because today, of all days, is the day that we get to announce that we are officially sponsored by. We joke about that a lot, but to that end, Matt, you and I have talked about potentially opening up to sponsors. So to that end, for all of you watching at home who have just thought to yourself, this is the prime audience for my company, for my product, reach out. You can find us on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. So this is, it's a little bit of an unorthodox week. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that the world is in an interesting place, just kind of collectively. But to that end, we thought it was really important to kind of trudge on as best we could. Because there is always stuff happening in the Microsoft universe. And we're excited to talk about that. We're going to do things in kind of a somewhat less structured format than we do. We're still talking about kind of the marquee things that we promised we would the last time around. But yeah, Matt, what's your world like? What are you up to?
Not too much. It's going through the roadmap for this week. I figured we'd cover what was newly announced for this month. And funny enough, some of the things that we've already covered this month are due this month. They were new and due. So it's kind of funny how some of these last minute updates are tossed in there. It's like, oh, that's right. We've been working on this for 2 months and we forgot to tell anybody they were going to be putting out there. But there are a few of them in that were interesting to me. I work with one client is in the government space, so it's kind of cool to see some of the stuff coming out there. But it wasn't a huge amount of stuff that was announced, at least not stuff that was like, I don't know, seemingly important to like an everyday user, which is generally the kind of like litmus test I do for yanking some of these to highlight.
Yeah, and this is actually a really great opportunity for us to kind of emphasize, I think we talk about it like once a quarter, just to kind of the whole point of our show isn't to talk about everything that happens in the Microsoft universe, because there's a lot that happens. I mean, Microsoft is a monolith. There's Xbox, there's M365, but even within M365, there are components to it that aren't necessarily relevant to the everyday user. I think that our North Star since we started was really the admin for the small business, the person who was going to talk to the stakeholders that didn't really care what new administrative features were coming online. It was going to be, what is the stuff that's going to impact me as the user today? We talked about before we even launched the show, this idea of like teachers that were leveraging this platform, like the teacher that doesn't have time to figure out what new things have come online, but that there are new things that could be relevant that improve their day to day.
So yeah, it's I don't know, kind of a weirdish list. There's some, I don't know, esoteric ones that are in there, but I don't know. It was interesting enough. So what do you want to do? You want to kick off on some of the items that are in there, and we'll just back and forth on some feedback?
Yeah, let's do it. But to that end, I think it's really important that we not throw everything out the window. And so with that,
this is the news.
Starting with OneDrive. OneDrive's getting a lot of really interesting things, but the two things that we wanted to kind of highlight, the first of which I think is really interesting, an activity column in the My Files experience to show which files have unseen edits and comments, almost like an email inbox. That's projected for April of 2022. That's kind of cool. And then the second one is a new Your Teams section in the More Places page to allow easier access to files in Teams. That's slated for March 2021. Matt, OneDrive is getting some. I'm sorry, your witness.
Yeah, man. That OneDrive one with the access to Teams, I'll tell you that one of the for organizations I work with who have where Teams is really sort of still a new experience, especially in the file collaboration standpoint. Finding, like, first off, knowing that those files and Teams are actually in SharePoint is a major hurdle, and then just getting to them has been difficult because it means you have to go to Teams, then you have to open in SharePoint, then you have to follow the SharePoint site or bookmark the site or sync it or add to, either way, there's additional steps you have to do. And if it's just straight up, hey, I have OneDrive syncing to my File Explorer and I can actually see a place where these show up. Although I think they said this is going to be in the web experience, but even so, that's still an improvement over how do I find these disparate containers that are out there, and now it's going to bring them sort of closer into a central spot, which I think is a great thing.
I couldn't agree more. I still think that one of the biggest hurdles that Microsoft has in front of them is helping users to understand where they are, the "you are here" part of it. So when I'm in OneDrive, but I'm seeing content in SharePoint, like, how do you effectively communicate that? Because I know that I've been having this conversation for 5 years, 6 years of OneDrive is for me, SharePoint is for us. But when you blur the lines and you start showing users SharePoint content, and users are just kind of barely holding on to this bundle of straws that is their understanding of the paradigm of M365, you have to be really careful with that, So I'm glad to see them trying to create more clarity, using the Teams nomenclature as an example. Although, of course, I'm a little concerned with, again, them using like my Teams, but not necessarily referencing capital T Teams.
Yeah.
But I do think that that's a nice thing. The activity column in My Files, which is going to show users whether a file has unseen edits or comments. And of course, those are for files that have been shared with other users, with other individuals. That seems pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to follow along with the activity feed that comes in with an Office app. And, a couple of the organizations I work with really love their Office desktop apps and, pry them from my cold, dead hands type of perspective. So in doing some trainings and showing some of the benefits of the browser versions of the apps, which like everyday editing in Excel and PowerPoint, more like Excel and Word. PowerPoint's still a little iffy, but showing off that activity feed, which doesn't exist in the desktop apps yet, at least not in this environment. There were definitely a number of like, oh, that's cool. It's like, see, there is a reason to come in here. You can, join me.
There is a reason to pay me money.
Right.
Which brings me back to sponsors. No, I think it's great. I think it's super useful. So let's jump over to Teams because my favorite productivity and yours. I have a couple of others that are close. Teams is getting some new features, especially in the government space. So for all of our friends in the GCC High, and DoD universes, starting with one-on-one chat is going to include, this is for just regular Teams users. Sorry, government, hype you up like that. One-on-one chats will include a LinkedIn tab starting next month. A filter in chat to hide meeting and bot chats, as well as the ability to highlight one-on-one and group chats is on the way. Really, really useful for those individuals who consider the chat list to be a little more busy than they'd like. All GCC clouds will be getting the default option settings for where to open Office files starting in April. Our Department of Defense friends are getting the ability to disable the camera for one or multiple participants in a meeting. And if anybody needs that, it's the DoD. And lastly, on the Teams front, GCC is getting walkie-talkie mode for iOS sometime this month by the look of it. They snuck that one in there.
Yeah.
A lot of love for government, Matt.
Once in a while. It
Once
happens,
in a while.
Every so often. I'm trying to remember which one it was that popped up. What was the second one on that list?
That was the ability to filter the chat list. So that you can filter out like group meetings and bots.
I think that's a good one because all of those meeting chats easily kind of take over your chat listing in Teams. And one thing I try to push pretty hard on people, and they kind of get annoyed because it's like, I don't know, why are you being so picky? Is if I'm in a chat with two people and then I have a meeting with those two people, the chat for that meeting is separate from the chat with those two people. And if you have like a couple different meetings, maybe they're people you work with regularly, the fact that you have all these different chats around, disparate conversations going on, because people will just by default go to the meeting chat if they want to send something. I always try to force people back to no, go back to where we always talk, because these other chats are a waste of space. And I wish you could dedicate that, choose where the chat is so that everything always goes back to the same place. Yes, I could call them in that chat. That's true. But maybe I don't want to, or maybe I want to schedule their time or, whatever else.
Just going to not schedule meetings.
But maybe this will get people a little bit more towards just hide your meeting chats from now on. Don't get distracted by those, because otherwise you got all these different chats with potentially the same people bouncing around all the time, and it's just really frustrating to try to find stuff when the whole point of these chat solutions is to get me out of the mess that is an email inbox, and that doesn't do it.
It's so interesting because the idea in a vacuum of there's going to be a dedicated chat for that meeting, so we can go, right. 6 months down the road, we can go, we met here. What did we talk about? And to be able to dredge that up. But setting that aside for a moment, the exact use case you've highlighted, which is I already talk to these people
regularly. Yeah, exactly.
Regularly. And so now I have to rely on Microsoft Search, which we know is being incorporated into Microsoft Teams. To be smart enough to parse across all these different surfaces instead of me saying, no, I know it's here. And, it opens up so many potential challenges. And on top of that, the bot component of it here, Slack does a really good job with apps being cordoned off into their own separate space. Apps can still DM you, and they can still chat you. Yeah. But they exist in their own universe. And I think this is a step in the right direction, them being able to say, well, let's, let you filter them out. But I think an extension of that conversation potentially is just being able to, I don't think any of us want, the quiz bot to be personified. I don't think that we need that. We can have the paradigm of chat without having it have to sit next to Matt Wade in my chat. You know what I mean?
Yep. No, agreed.
So I'm glad to see that they're making this change. And government getting a little bit of love here. Now, of course, this tends to happen. Government things tend to come in waves.
They do. You're absolutely right about that.
And my understanding of it is that they tend to, it tends to be when they can actually get people to go in, because of course it's a much more strenuous process to get engineers in to actually go touch things. They have to wait until everything has been rubber stamped across multiple layers of approvals, at which point it all tends to light up at the same time. They vet it.
I would love to know the process. I have tried so hard to get an understanding of who the people are on the back end. Is there a separate product group for government or for each of the each of those cloud levels, or is it just, there happens to be an SME in each product group for the apps that and from what I hear, it's more the latter. But for example, GCC High doesn't have Microsoft Graph.
Right.
Period. Like it doesn't
Which is
exist.
Crazy.
Which okay, so I don't have Delve, right? Like whatever. But it's not just that. It's the fact that the entire SharePoint start page is useless because the only things that get listed there are the sites that I'm following, because that's not a graph element. That's just a list of things. The SharePoint app bar doesn't work at all because all of that stuff is, except for the files, is all graph related. And then other like stupid random things that are not stupid when it comes to real world usage. When you create a new Microsoft list, there are options, right? Templates, blank, whatever. Well, one of them is to create a list based on an Excel spreadsheet, which has been a standard way of doing things in SharePoint land since like 2003.
Sure.
Well, apparently that's graph dependent, right? So like just even so the option just doesn't exist. And it's like infuriating because people have been used to doing this on an on-prem system and like, wait, the cloud is, supposed to have more featers. And it's like, yeah, right. I know, but right. I'm just trying to get, and I use that because it has real world implications, like real world user interface things that like are annoying. And I'm not like trying to just call out graph, but all of
although
it,
it's a glaring one,
right? But like all of it, where does the SharePoint team know that graph doesn't support the SharePoint start page? I don't know. And like who on the government side of making sure SharePoint works in the government environments tested that? Like what QA process happened, if any, frankly? Because I would never consider the SharePoint start page as a deliverable final product.
Right. Like let's push this out there to any number of customers.
Or the app bar, just don't push it out to government. Now, granted, I'm sure they could come back and say, well, we have to push it out because you can't just like make a different code base just for this one thing. But it's like, I mean,
bad news for you. You've already done that.
Yeah, pick one. Like pick a side. But like I don't know. It can get very frustrating.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that one. It would be interesting. My understanding is something similar. Like there's not a dedicated team per se on the product level. It tends to be like a SME of some sort. But I have
more visibility.
Yeah, and this is, from when I was first getting into government, that was something I always asked for as well, was more transparency, more visibility.
Yeah.
It strikes me that anytime somebody has made the mistake of sticking their head up and saying that I am representative of this particular niche, whether it's, like Teams government is a great example of that. They have just gotten absolutely walloped.
Yeah.
Because there's no institutional structure that is supporting them. These are people who raise their hand and try to do good because they understand the pain points. And Microsoft lets them hang themselves out to dry, quite literally. And it makes me sad. So, I know that we beat this drum every now and again, but Microsoft, it would be really great to have some institutional structural support on the government side that doesn't rely on people just banging on a trash can. All right. Soapbox over. Let's go ahead and jump over to Outlook. Outlook's got a few tricks up its sleeve coming up. Apps for Teams will be available for Outlook too, apparently both for web and desktop. Preview is starting this month. General availability is set for December of 2022. The presumption being that this is going to require some substantial rethinking for most apps from the Teams and the Outlook side of things. So that'll be really interesting to see who splits the hair, who's still going to focus purely on Outlook, who's still purely going to focus on Teams. The OWA app bar, so the Office web app bar, is finally coming to desktop, and boy, is it probably going to be really annoying for any desktop app lovers. Time to get the popcorn with a dash of petty change complaining. Everybody knows that when you touch the desktop Outlook app, the pitchforks come out.
Well, dude, have you I'm sure you've seen the Mac version, the new Outlook on Mac, right?
Yeah.
So I assume that's what's going to happen on Windows. It's just taking a lot longer because the Windows user base is so much larger and also very much louder.
Yeah, and change-averse, substantially more change-averse. The Mac users, who we mentioned, I think, a couple of weeks ago, they tend to be a little bit more amenable to take your medicine.
But
the
also,
UI has changed.
There's just a lot fewer of us. So who cares if there's only 5 pitchforks and torches being brought up? Then who gives a crap, right? Like,
but they're the best looking torches and
true.
pitchforks.
Yes, they all have rounded corners. It's very nice.
And then there's one more update I'll throw out here, which is iOS and Android for Outlook will soon let you access the room finder and book rooms during meetings, which I can only assume is going to be very specifically for the return to the office scenario. You're doing a walk and talk session. You're going through the hallways and you're like, what about this room? Is this room available? And just book it in real time.
I think that's what it is. The details weren't super clear on that one, but I think you're right.
Yeah, it's going to be just like an Aaron Sorkin-esque walk and talk. You're going through the hallway and you're like, what about this room? Is this room good?
That's right.
And then just bing, bing, bing.
Yes, that's perfect. So yes, I cannot wait to get the popcorn out to watch when we have to roll out an updated Outlook desktop client to all of our users, and they say, wait a minute, this isn't like the one that's on-prem. How dare you take this away from us?
I used to teach a 2-day Outlook class for a previous company that I worked with, 8 hours each day. And, it was about everything from, like how to set up rules to managing your contacts and this, that, and the other. But there was an entire hour that was dedicated to customization of the Outlook desktop app. Yeah. And the number one question that I got was, how do I make it look like Outlook 2010? Because it does not matter.
I know.
From version to version, how good the changes are from the usability perspective. People hate change. And so having to show people how to customize that away was hilarious.
It's kind of, I kind of like, that's one of the reasons why I really like the cloud, because you get many more changes, but they're a lot smaller and incremental versus having to deal with not just the IT side of like upgrading from Office 2007 to Office 2010 or 2013 or whatever, but people can't complain that much, right? The complaint about a minor change, even if it's more frequent, means that they're less likely to complain at all, and they just tolerate the minor change more. And I think that that's a good thing, personally.
Yeah, it's I believe that the official phrasing of that is it's the drip release. So it's just a little thing here, a little thing there. I've always referred to it as boiling the frog release. Like you're steadily just cranking up the temperature on these, and nobody is the wiser most of the time, because you're like, oh, it's a little warmer, but it's not that bad.
Right.
But I'm really glad to see us continuing to push the ball forward towards unified interface, because I think that one of the big questions we continue to face is where do I use the web versus the desktop? Because the visual discrepancy is so great that it is
in Outlook. It is.
Yeah, in Outlook. Yeah. It's impossible to rationalize in your head that they do the same thing. From an end user perspective. Like I know that the web is better most of the time.
Well, the example I always give is just like it's just so bloated in the desktop for Windows, right? And I was just looking at the Mac desktop app, and like even that doesn't have the app bar on the left side yet. It's still at the bottom left. But the big difference is you open up your calendar in the Windows app, and in the top ribbon you have new appointment, new meeting, new drop down, and then new Teams meeting. So you now have 3 different event types, right? Those are things, like they do exist. An appointment is just for me, a meeting is for multiple people, it takes up their time, and a Teams meeting includes the online, meeting experience, right?
But most users don't care about those distinctions.
Or don't know, or whatever else. But like when you get into the web version, it's just new event, and then you invite somebody, and it's now a meeting from an appointment. Like
exactly,
you toggle Teams meeting, now it has a Teams meeting. It's just a setting. And I don't know. I guess I get why they did it in the past, because like, oh, just give people the template that they need, and it's like, yeah, but I mean, look at that one big blue button versus 3 that you have to think about. What's the difference between an appointment and a meeting? I wonder. Like I don't know. It's just. It drains your brain power because you have to make choices that you didn't know you had to make before.
100%. Yeah. And that was a question that I used to get in the 2-day training all the time was, what's the difference between an event and a meeting? And then you have to explain that, somebody made the decision that this button would send an email behind the scenes, and this one didn't.
Yeah.
And that instead of imbuing the app with logic, they would just give you two buttons. Agile development at its best.
Well, the side of Matt Wade that likes to see the world burn just cannot wait to see when these UI changes in Windows Outlook start happening.
I wonder if when we start to see this, how web dependent that UI is going to be.
Yeah.
It's like a big controversy again. Like I said at the outset, we don't talk about everything Microsoft does, but one of the big hullabaloos in the Microsoft universe outside of what you and I talk about is that Windows 11 Pro, which is the one that most businesses use, most enterprise use, is going to require internet access and a Microsoft account in order to run through the motions on that. That's a change coming down the pipe right now.
I missed that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some nuance I'm missing here, but to that end, it increasingly is a requisite that you're plugged in to the internet to do the most basic things. And so I'll be interested to see just how functional that desktop application is on the Windows side specifically when this is all said and done.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's go ahead and jump over to Power BI. Kind of an interesting one here. Now, it's funny because I feel like somebody on the Power BI team must have heard us complaining about the fact
or they got lost and they just what? They were on the yellow brick road and they found their way to the road map. I don't know. That's somehow.
So yeah, kind of a random one, but Power BI, according to the roadmap, will include an app template that will list greenhouse gas emissions associated with your organization's usage of Microsoft 365 apps, including Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. This strikes me as not the Power BI team that created this entry. They were like, sure, I guess this is check the Power BI box. This feels like an M365 admin release. That happens to have a Power BI component. But to that end, if we're wrong and somebody from the Power BI team is just testing the waters, I want you to know, because I know you're watching
dive
this
in the
show,
deep end with us.
We love it more. Yes. But that's kind of cool though. So a lot of software as a service companies are doing this now. DocuSign is one that comes to mind for me, where it will tell you over a period of time, how many trees you've saved by routing digital documents.
So that's a positive though. This is still going to tell you that you're using energy, not saving energy, I assume. Which, like, what do? Put that on your intranet homepage and be like, hey guys, don't use too much SharePoint space because you might kill more trees. Like, it's not going to change any behaviors.
I hadn't considered that would be used as a cudgel. Yeah, I guess it really depends on how they spin that, because from my perspective, if it's, like, here's all the ways that you're more energy efficient.
Yeah.
I guess that's true about it.
I guess they could do a comparison, because I don't know what the thing actually looks like, but it could be like, oh, well, if you had the server on-prem supporting this whole thing, this is how much energy it would use to do it. But since you're sharing services with other people or other organizations, you're only using X, which you're right. That could very well be. You're right, though. The DocuSign example is great, because that, I don't know, just report that up to your green executive or whatever to say, like, oh, we saved 9,000 trees because we signed way too many contracts at this place.
Yeah, because I do think that potentially if it's just a negative thing, or like keep track of your footprint, that could potentially become problematic very, very quickly. We'll see though. Keep an eye out for it. Jumping over to SharePoint here, there's some excitement happening over in the SharePoint universe. Site owners will soon be able to manage requests for SharePoint store apps. So my presumption is this is going to be on a site-by-site basis, something that for those of you who have never had to, on an organization-wide scale, deal with people just requesting the nonsense across hundreds of SharePoint sites, this is a net positive. But for most users, the experience is probably just hopefully going to be a little bit more agile. Or potentially you just have your own SharePoint site and you can approve your own request. Teams private channel sites are getting a refreshed homepage layout in March. So next month, Teams private channel sites. So of course, Matt, you famously give a talk at every conference I've been to about Teams etiquette but as an extension to that, you talk about just kind of Teams as a collective. And one of your big pillars is how unique Teams private channel sites are. Because when you create a private channel in Teams, that's not just core-genning off the chat, Matt. It's creating a whole new SharePoint site.
Yeah. I don't think people realize what they were asking for when they asked for private channels. And of course, everybody said, but I want to do it the way that Slack does it. How come Slack has private channels? And I think I want to slap every single person that says that, because it means they don't understand what a channel in Slack is versus what a channel in Teams are, because they're two different levels. A team is a channel from Slack. So the concept of channels in Microsoft Teams is a level lower than what Slack offers. Now, eventually Slack brought up, I think it was workspaces. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, if you are enterprise grade, you can have like essentially entire application workspaces.
Yeah, and that was them pushing up, so you could have channels in workspaces, which is not how Slack was originally designed, and then teams have teams with channels in them. And when you want a private channel and you don't want the owner of the team to have access to the content, and since they can own the SharePoint site behind the team, you have to make a separate SharePoint site. So people didn't realize what they were asking for. And then when it was delivered, they said it was too complex. And there was just no self-reflection in that request. And everybody that wanted it was like, just make a team. Well, that's too many teams on my list then. It's like, then pin your channels. Like, my Lord. Anyway.
Yeah, you and I have, I think, in so many different scenarios and in so many different venues, tried to like couch quarterback how they could have developed that better.
And there's not really a way.
There's really not. I mean, what do? You start to create unique permissions on a per document library level, and that gets really complex, really messy, really fast.
But even so, like you're the site collection administrator if you're the team owner. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You'd have to like re-architect SharePoint from the ground up, kind of. And like, I don't need to give people more complexity for permissions. It's bad enough as it is.
Yeah, I mean, no pretty way to do that. So to that end, for anybody who has, because I do think that private channel sites, SharePoint sites that get created with private channels tend to be woefully underused. And when people do get into them, it almost feels like you got lost in the back of like a conference center. Like you're in a hallway you weren't supposed to be in, and you can tell because it's like cement and chairs.
You're in the service hallway. Yeah.
You're like, I'm not supposed to be here.
Right.
So I don't know what this is going to look like, but I'm optimistic that it's going to hopefully be a little bit more kind of plain spoken, a little bit simpler, and a little less generic. Yeah, because I think it was just giving you like the default SharePoint new site page.
It was actually a bit castrated. They specifically didn't include certain features because they didn't want to encourage people to use the site for anything other than just the documents library. So I don't know if they're going to add more features or what, but it's like a unique template style that they don't really advertise.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see. And then the last announcement that we've got here for SharePoint, site collection administrators, which for Microsoft 365 groups means the group owners, Matt, as you mentioned just a moment ago, will be able to enable management of content types directly within a SharePoint library for modern libraries and lists. Now, that's a lot of gibberish for anybody who doesn't deal with content types, but just as kind of a high level, when you create, any document list or library, there's a content type associated with it that has a combination of metadata fields, columns associated with it. For a new list, for example, it's typically title, and I think that's it, actually. It's just title. And then document library, it's the name of the file and title. So to that end, you can have multiple content types associated with the document library. But in order to do that, you have to go diving into, we'll call it classic SharePoint, right? You have to go diving into the advanced settings of a specific library just to enable that. So that can be anywhere between 3 and 4 clicks just to allow yourself the ability to manage content types. So from what I can tell here, Matt, you tell me what your interpretation of this is. It sounds like this is going to kind of modernize the tool, the option that will allow owners, site collection administrators, to do just that.
That's what it sounds like, yeah. And I don't know. I think this is another one of those things where I know they wanted to get modern on as soon as they could, and they tolerated the fact that certain features weren't available. Like we only just got lookup columns in the modern view like a month ago, if that, right? Like, and that's a long time to wait for some reasonably critical features for people that kind of take Microsoft lists to the and SharePoint lists to the the extreme for real world use cases, whatever. But yeah, it sounds like that's gonna. I've never really played with content types. I think I've sat through Mark Anderson's content type session 2 or 3 times at different conferences, and it's always fantastic. And it's always like, oh, so many opportunities, and then I forget and don't do it, and it's like, But there's a lot of people out there that love content types in SharePoint. They're still there, so
yeah. Content types is one of those things that I genuinely feel like needs to be rethought for the modern SharePoint universe, because one of the big things with content types is that it allows you to say, that there are multiple kinds of files or multiple kinds of items that can exist in a list or a library, each of which have their own predetermined combination of questions, details that we ask.
Yeah.
But I think for most users, they're not thinking about it through any lens other than this file goes here. So I'm glad that they're modernizing another kind of, I'll call it institutionally relevant. This is something that has been built on, was the concept of content types. I'm glad to see them modernizing it. I'm hoping that there's more to it over a period of time that helps to make it a little bit more clear to the end user and really to admins who are going to be dealing with us on a side-by-side basis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, and the last bit of news we got here is on the Yammer side of things. Yammer's got a few things going for it. Dark mode, the hot thing for just everything apparently. Dark mode is coming next month. Bookmarks on threads, which I presume means you're going to be able to bookmark.
It's like a saved message in Teams.
Right. Yeah. You'll be able to hold on to it and refer back to it, which will be potentially super helpful, especially for individuals or organizations that use Yammer groups to share critical business information. And lastly, support for Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, formerly known as Microsoft Cloud App Security, coming in May. I'm not 100% sure what that means.
I thought some of the admins out there might enjoy that bone if I toss it to them.
Well, there you go. I saw something interesting about Yammer. I want to say that my friend and yours, Dan Holm, went on Twitter. And I feel like we talk about Twitter every time we're here because as we continue to mention, that's where the conversation happens.
Yep.
In the Microsoft universe. It happens on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
But Dan Holm, I believe it was Dan Holm, went out and said that there's so much exciting stuff happening in Yammer that the year of Yammer, which was...
I was going to say, is it another year of Yammer? I'm pretty sure the year of Yammer was 2020.
Yeah, it was 2 years
19 into 20, right?
Yeah.
And then the pandemic happened, and poor Mike Holstey's just like, the air came out of that balloon, I think, It was...
that the year of Yammer was just the beginning, and that the conversations happening behind the scenes, the work happening right now that we're not seeing, the development that is in progress is so much bigger than that. And I want to believe that's true. I genuinely do. Because it's clear that Yammer isn't going away. It's clear that they've invested in it to a degree to which they're trying to find exactly how to sit in this chair that already exists in a way that is comfortable for everybody. But I have a hard time thinking about how they can make it feel relevant to small and medium businesses. Large businesses.
You need to have at least 200 people to make Yammer justifiable, I think.
To invest in it. Yeah. I hope that they can find a way to lower that number.
I don't think that, I don't think that's possible. So I get the concept of communities, but it's not meant to be a community of 5, right? Where like teams can be a team of 5 people, right? They're literally delivering something. They're using Teams as a collaborative environment. Yammer is much more about the people who have shared interests, shared skill sets, shared professions that aren't in the same hierarchy in the organization and want to share information or need to share information in a way that's not, like I don't need to be on 30 email distro groups just because I happen to have interest in various things, because I would never get any work done if all of those emails were going all around. But if I check in on Yammer, which is, more of a LinkedIn experience, and I can kind of see, what's hot, what's popular, what's, popping up at the top of my feed, that's a good spot to ask the question of, all of the project managers in the organization. Hey, does anybody know what the SOP is on doing, setting up a new project flow and sticking to an agile, is there a template? Like it's that kind of stuff that's super useful. And you have to be in a situation where you have a population large enough where that's necessary. So first, the organization itself has to be large enough where you don't know everybody, or it's roughly impossible for you to know everybody. And I think that 200 is probably a threshold there where you're not going to, run into that. And then in that company 200, if you have 25 project managers, okay, might be a chance you don't know them all. And that's a place to do it. But the larger, the better, I think, because Teams to me is more like heads down, getting crap done. And Yammer is the, hey, does anybody know how to blah, 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 blah? And like, I think the use case separation there is abundantly clear, at least in my eyes. I mean, if I still have to answer the which tool line question constantly for people, why Teams, why Yammer? But once I break it down into that, people are much more apt to walk away and say like, okay, that makes sense. Now they might be less inclined with Yammer because, now I have to deal with another tool, another set of notifications, another app on my phone, all that kind of stuff. But if they can see the value of it and bring people over, you can do it.
I think my issue with Yammer is, and this is almost definitely because of my affinity for Slack, is that it's too heavy to be simple. Like you said that an organization has to be 200 people or more in order, and I agree with you.
Arbitrary number for the record, but that's
sure. Yeah. I mean, like right. It's got to be a fairly large organization, right, because you're going to get 15%, 20% adoption. Yeah. Not everybody's going to share the same interests. You're going to end up with like 2 people in the I Love Excel Yammer group.
Yeah.
But in Slack, it's such a lightweight thing because you just do what you already do for work, which is you just create a channel.
Yeah.
And there's a real-time communication and engagement component to it that I think is missing from Yammer that makes it feel less alive.
So the fact that you're putting the Yammer kind of, like the feed experience, like the algorithmic feed experience into, and like, because that's what Yammer is, right? It's like Facebook or LinkedIn. It promotes right. what it thinks you want to see, versus Teams and Slack, you have to see everything chronologically. That's just the way it works. And I don't care, honestly, to have my notifications in Teams get swamped by a bunch of randos asking questions. And that's what happened. Like, if you do that in Slack, I mean, maybe you haven't run into that. I could definitely see that happening if people are using Teams in my organization that way, where they just overwhelm people with sure. notifications that now are seen as equal in Teams to the actual notifications of somebody responded to a post of mine, somebody mentioned me, things like that, which like the whole point of Teams is to give you that control over those notifications. Because in email, if I get an email from a conference and it's advertising to me like, hey, don't forget our new webinar, or I get an email from my boss asking me to do something, as far as Outlook is concerned, those are equal. And the badge goes from 0 to 1 to 2, even though the value of each of those emails is wildly different. Right? Like that's
you're 100% right. Yeah.
Right. And so I don't like Teams being used that way, because unless you have to, like, for example, in the government cloud, we don't have Yammer. But if you have to do that, fine. But I just don't want to muddy up my notification anymore. I have to,
Sure. And I will say that continues to be an ongoing evolution within the Slack universe is that the user still holds a lot of responsibility for curating notifications
Right.
on a channel by channel basis.
And people don't want to do that. It's amazing that people will say, I want fewer notifications, but they won't take a couple of minutes to like go through and check what they're getting notifications on. Right. Like, which is, I don't know. You do it on Facebook all the time. Oh, geez, I don't want to get this notification anymore, and you tell it to not tell you the notifications.
No, they don't. Have you been like the Marie Calendar Facebook? Please remove me from this group.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, no, but to your point, and it is a good point that I think that the population of the enterprise world does depend on that algorithmic processing and management in a way that I think Slack is a little too hands-on for. I just hope that there's a way to find like the middle when it comes to being able to connect with people in a more live way. Because right now I think Yammer feels too heavy. Teams is way too heavy for that. Hoping that there's a way to kind of loosen it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's the end of the list. You want to take a couple questions before we close off today?
Yeah, let's do it.
Alrighty.
Now, of course, as we're pulling this up here, this is the part where I always mention we try to schedule these out a couple of days in advance. If you've got a question and you're not going to be able to catch the live show, you can still jump onto YouTube, find the scheduled video, and leave a comment or a question for us to take a look at during the show. So even if you're asleep, your friends in Europe and you're asleep, you can still get your question answered. I want to start with this one here because I love the question. Is the love being lost for Microsoft bookings? What is the best booking solution? Isn't there something that can be done where parties can book a slot through Outlook? Matt,
was there ever love for bookings?
No, I don't think there was
so either. So I know bookings is kind of like a Calendly competitor. And then that connects, is built right into Outlook, as opposed to Calendly kind of has to do a little bit of integration and may not have full access to stuff. I don't know about like additional features or what their roadmap is about. But it's not like I don't think it's going anywhere.
No, so it just got Bookings got a UI overhaul within the last 12 months. It's gotten a fresh coat of paint. They are introducing new features. We had talked about one a couple weeks ago where they're allowing users to connect Microsoft Forms with Bookings so that when somebody books an appointment, that you can use Microsoft Forms to collect some information from them in advance of the meeting. That's super useful. But no, Microsoft Bookings was never, apologies to the MS Bookings team, it was never good. It was better than nothing, but it's attempting to solve a problem using this legacy complexity that is the Microsoft 365 universe. When you create a bookings account, when you create like a bookings calendar, it creates an entirely separate Exchange object. Yeah. Like just brand new. And admins don't know to expect that, which means that those things get deleted all the time, which could be a huge problem. I love Calendly. I think Calendly is the best solution, not just for organizations that use Microsoft 365, but more importantly, organizations that use more than just Office or Microsoft 365. So if you use Teams, great. You can have it generate Teams meetings for those appointments that are booked. Do you use Zoom? Great. You can have Zoom integrated into it, and it'll create a Zoom instance for all those meetings that are booked. I would love Microsoft Bookings to be more like Calendly because we pay for it. Like my whole organization is on, E5. I'd love if I could say like, oh, you don't need Calendly. Let me show you Bookings. But it feels like it was built for a hairdresser.
Oh, I mean, like literally. So I just went to it, right? In my O365 tenant, and it doesn't even open. Like it opens up a page that's basically like a home page to like if you were, well, it says onboarding, like get it now and then choose a calendar. But like if I scroll down, it has, delight your customers, financial services, hair salon, home services. And the irony is each of those examples are buttons, and if you click one of them, it just opens Bing.
Really?
So like these links that they're putting in this like homepage to this app don't even show me the example that like the links are dead basically.
Yeah, they just point to nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
And then I will add that this is probably more so for our Apple Universe friends, but Fantastical, which is made by forgotten the name of it, but it's a really great calendaring app for Apple and iOS devices. They just released a calendaring feature for people who subscribe to that. It's not as robust as Calendly by any stretch, but if you already pay for Fantastical, you can tap into that for free, which is pretty cool. I'll see if I can. That was recently announced in the last like 3 weeks, so I'll see if I can dig up the announcement and share it there. But yeah, Calendly would be my recommendation. Matt, sounds like you're kind of meh.
I've never used either. Like I've never needed people to book me from the outside. I would generally just
you have people for that. You know,
yeah.
call my
No,
agent.
I just ask Cortana to do it for me, and then think of it as the most insulting thing you can do these days is, oh yeah, Cortana, go deal with this person that I don't want to talk to and have the emails back and forth with it.
I didn't realize you were so well off. You've got money like that to pay for an M365 license and Cortana?
I don't use that. It's ridiculous.
All right. Next question here. What is the status of the desktop app for Microsoft Loop?
So that is a great question. The Microsoft Loop team is very, very much holding a lot of this stuff close to their chest. And I was just trying to look up to see when Microsoft Inspire and when Microsoft Build are. So Build is I think it's almost always in July. And Inspire, is that the one? No, Ignite last year was in March, right? I think. It was twice.
Yeah, but Inspire was also in March, I think.
Yeah. So I think you will hear more at the next major conference. And especially Build in July, they'll probably talk about basically building on it as a platform and whatnot. Replacing To Do in OneNote. There's a lot of use cases for Loop. I think one of the takeaways from the Ignite discussion on Loop is that everybody just thought it was a Notion clone. And yes, it looks like a Notion clone, but Notion is really a OneNote clone. It doesn't really do anything fancy at all, and neither does Loop. So it's kind of closing the loop, for lack of a better term, from OneNote to Notion to Loop. But Loop's benefit really is the editable content pieces, those Loop components that can be surfaced in various apps, or at least will be eventually. Right now, you got just access to it in Teams chat. But so I think we're going to hear about that at some of the conferences coming up. And that was really just a hype opportunity that they had in, I think that was October, November for last Ignite.
Yeah. And I think it was on LinkedIn, somebody poked both of us and were like, you're not talking about Loop. Loop is out there, man. And it's doing stuff and it's changing the world. Matt, I'm in M365 every workday. I have not used Loop in like a working scenario, not once.
So I don't have it available in the main tenant that I work on day to day because it's not in government yet, of course. But I could definitely see myself using it. Anytime I send somebody a proposed like wording of something, if I could just use that paragraph Loop component and say, here, edit this, provide your comments or whatever. Otherwise, I have to create a Word document and then have them use like track changes or something. And that just seems so heavy compared to a Loop component or like a task list or an agenda or something like that. I think right now, just the fact that it's so limited to Teams chat means that most people don't have any real exposure to it. Do I think that the app is necessary for people to get exposure? Yeah, probably just for the sake of people not knowing that there's features in other places. So if it actually has like a home, they're more likely to use it. But it's really the value is going to be once I can put a Loop component in an email and I can put it also in a Word document and I can also put it in a presentation so that I can update that in one place and it updates all of those media, no matter where I called it out. That's going to be, I think Loop is going to be as game changing as Teams was, frankly, because of the ability to to almost have like a formal repository of official information where if you update it once, no matter what other place references it, it will update. So I don't know. That's my view.
Do you think there's a future where loop isn't a feature? It just is.
I think that
Microsoft?
I think that is the future. I think so. Loop, the potential for loop to me is that it's like the thread that completes the seams between so many disparate experiences.
Right. So is like is every paragraph in a Word document, every slide in a presentation, every table in an Excel spreadsheet just a loop component in the future?
I don't know. Maybe. I think it comes down to getting the point across to people that, like, why does Word exist? Why does Excel exist? Why does PowerPoint exist? And it's because Word exists because we had typewriters and U.S. letter size pieces of paper. But that's completely arbitrary and based on historical progress and humanity. Why do spreadsheets exist? Because we had paper ledgers that accountants would write things on, and they had templates that they used. Why do we have slides why do they look the way they do? Because that machine had, you put the slides in a little circular thing and present that thing, right? And that's completely arbitrary. The only reason that we have these 3 different applications is because of the arbitrary usage of those things. And having just a blank white canvas that can align itself to whatever shape and size monitor you use or display that you want to use is sort of reinventing the concept of building content or creating content or stuff in a world where, we're not paper-free yet, but we're much more apt to use a paper-free experience. And there's no reason to be stuck to these arbitrary structures. Now, are they useful from like a standardization standpoint? Sure. But if you don't need them to be, then don't do it that way. And I think that that's kind of powerful from like especially the app standpoint where you can drop all these pieces. I don't know, for people who have used Numbers, which is the Apple version of Excel, I actually always really like the fact that when you create a new Numbers file, unlike Excel, where you're stuck with the A through whatever, and then 1 through 87,000 or whatever, you can have different tables in the same document. And to me, that was always very new, because if you ever change the width of column C and you have something in column C 50 lines down that like you want to be able to not have that column width, you can't. You're stuck with that. And I always kind of think of that because it's like, I can have 5 different tables. They can all reference each other and they're all in the same sheet, right?
Right.
But imagine that being
create a whole other worksheet.
Right. Imagine that being a lot bigger, right? Like, and a lot more feature sets, and like, and people can relate or reference Notion all they want. Notion doesn't have, these editable features that can pop up in different apps.
The whole app is just Notion.
Right, exactly. It's just Notion. And like, is Notion good for taking notes or even like building an intranet? Frankly, I've noticed a bunch of people use it in a way to like a wiki kind of thing.
Sure.
Well, you can do all that with the Loop app once it's out, but also the content on it can be dynamic, and that's not something Notion has. So the whole concept of like, Notion or Loop is just a Xerox copy of Notion. Like, no, if you say that, you don't understand Loop. And you should.
Quick point of order: the Notion does have dynamic updating components, but only within Notion.
Right. You can't go to you can't put it into a Word document at the same time.
Right. Exactly. So it has that functionality, but it is constrained by the ecosystem it has, which is just itself.
Which is fine. And like, that's cool.
Sure.
But, that's the limitation of an ecosystem that's so limited, right? Like, it's just,
I'm just making sure to protect us from the Notionites that'll find us and be like, Matt, we've got 2 more quick questions. Let's see if we can blaze through this real fast. This one from Ross, our friend Ross. Any ETA on the updated experience for the web or desktop app? As far as the roadmap is concerned, it was supposed to launch this month. My assumption would be it just bumps to next month.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. I'll take a look and see if there's something in here.
And then the follow-up question to that is there an easy way to manage boards? No, but I believe that because I think they're still storing in Azure by default.
So I don't the fact that we're only just getting folders for Microsoft Forms like 3 years later, I don't have a whole lot of.
And Power Automate still doesn't.
That's right.
So
the
I'm not
roadmap
betting
says
on it.
that the whiteboard on Windows revamped is rolling out. Yeah, this month, rolling out this month. So I'm not sure. Let's see. Last updated on the 24th. So that was what, Thursday, Friday?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess they're saying it's a thing.
I guess we'll see. And then the last question here came in live from Dalton here. So many apps, so many updates. Thanks for the show to help us sort it out. You're welcome. Is there a dark horse app in M365 that you think might be a surprise this year? That a lot of the different ways to interpret that, Matt. I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I think this is going to be sort of a layup, but I think Loop is that thing, right? Because we can't actually use it, right? Like, or we can, but like we can't actually use like the app itself. We haven't seen it show up in anything but Teams private chat. So the anticipation of what it can do is the thing that I'm excited about, and the thing that I'm annoyed about because I can't get it yet. And like,
and I'll say that I think. I'm torn between lists because I think there's still so much cool stuff that can be done with lists. But I think as an extension of that, and I'll say my bigger answer is I think Power Automate. It's not really a dark horse, but I continue to think that it's the learning curve is still too high for the average end user, and that curve is only getting bigger because they're embedding it in more surfaces. Windows 11 is rolling out with Power Automate Desktop, the desktop version of Power Automate.
No kidding.
Just right out of the box, like it's there.
Oh, wow.
So
is that even in like personal versions too?
That's my understanding. Yeah, and it's free for personal users.
So it's basically like the Automator on
exactly right
on Mac OS. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
gotcha. Which
so
like that makes sense,
Yeah, it is what macros will be. To throw back to our macros conversation the other week, right. It is what macros will be for a lot of users potentially.
Yeah.
So I continue to hope that Power Automate is going to get more investment to lower that barrier to entry for the end user. I have no anything to back that up with, but that's the one I'm hoping is going to surprise most users by just appearing and being useful. All right, we did it. This very well might be our longest episode.
Yeah, definitely is. Yeah. I feel bad, but it's also kind of fun to dive into some of these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate you rolling with the punches with us, Matt.
No, not me. Everybody that watches.
I'm genuinely surprised we still have live viewers. What do you think?
Yes. All right. Well, I think that probably does it. Let's see. Sean, thanks so much for chatting with me today. For everybody else, like, subscribe, and make sure to drop some more comments in the comment section, and check out the show again next week. I usually have this posted like the Friday prior, and then at that point you can ahead of time push comments if you want to. You can also get a reminder if you hop onto YouTube at the time to get a reminder when we end up going live, so you can join live if you'd like to. But yeah, with that, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.